My words reached the alien Empress. Her soft reply changed everything I accept. Dr. Maya Chen sat alone in the control room of the Deep Space Communication Array, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as rain drummed against the facility's metal roof. It was 3 in the morning, and she was the only person awake in the entire complex. Outside, the massive satellite dishes pointed toward distant stars, sending humanity's carefully crafted messages into the void, just as they had done for the past 15 years without receiving a single reply. She pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders and stared at the transmission queue on her screen. Standard scientific greetings, mathematical proofs, diagrams of human DNA, recordings of Earth's greatest musical compositions. All of it approved by committees, sanitized, designed to present humanity as rational and worthy of contact. All of it ignored by the universe. Maya was supposed to be monitoring the incoming signal processors, not preparing new transmissions. That was someone else's job now. The enthusiasm that had filled the facility during its early years had long since evaporated. Most of her colleagues had moved on to other projects, other careers, other dreams. But Maya remained, unable to let go of the hope that somewhere out there, someone was listening. She opened a new file and began to type, knowing she shouldn't, knowing it violated every protocol in the handbook. But after 15 years of silence, what did protocols matter? She wrote about loneliness, about standing in a room full of sleeping colleagues and feeling utterly alone, about being a single voice crying out in infinite darkness, hoping for an echo that might never come. She wrote about her grandmother, who had passed away 3 years ago, and the lullaby the old woman used to sing when Maya was frightened as a child. She described the feeling of rain on skin, the taste of coffee at midnight, the ache of wanting to be understood by anyone who might truly comprehend what it meant to be human. Her hands shook as she attached an audio file, a recording she had made years ago of her grandmother singing that old lullaby. Maya's finger hovered over the send button for a long moment. This was career suicide. This was unprofessional. This was everything a serious scientist should never do. She pressed send. The transmission burst out from the array's dishes, racing toward a distant star system at the speed of light. Maya watched it go on her monitors, a tiny packet of hope and humanity disappearing into the cosmos. Then she deleted all evidence of what she had done from the official logs, marked herself as having completed routine monitoring duties, and went to bed. 3 months passed. Maya tried to forget about her impulsive transmission, burying herself in routine work and grant applications. The facility's funding was being cut again. Soon there might not be anyone left to listen for replies that would never come. She was reviewing equipment maintenance schedules when every alarm in the facility began to scream at once. Maya sprinted to the main control room, her heart hammering. Other staff members stumbled in, still pulling on clothes, their faces confused and frightened. The displays showed an incoming transmission, but not the simple radio pulse everyone had expected if first contact ever happened. This was massive, complex, layered with data in dozens of different formats. "What is this?" asked Director Morrison, pushing through the crowd. "Is this a malfunction? Multiple human languages. Perfect, eloquent words in English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic, Hindi, and dozens more, woven together like a tapestry. To Maya Chen, the lonely voice," the message began. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. Everyone in the room turned to stare at her. "I have heard your words. I have heard your grandmother's song. I have listened to your species for many cycles of your world, learning who you are through the poetry you send to the stars. You call yourselves small and insignificant, but you sing into the void anyway. You call yourselves alone, but you reach out anyway. You know you might never be heard, but you speak anyway. This is not insignificance. This is courage of a kind my empire has forgotten. For 300 cycles of your world, I have ruled worlds beyond your counting. I have made decisions that affected trillions of lives. I have never felt lonely until I heard you describe it, and then I understood that I have been lonely for centuries." The message referenced things from her personal transmission, the one she had sent in violation of every rule. But more than that, it referenced details she hadn't included, childhood memories, private moments, emotions she had barely articulated even to herself. Director Morrison was shouting something about protocols and government notification, but Maya couldn't hear him. She was reading the words on the screen, words that seemed to reach inside her chest and touch something she had thought untouchable. Your scientists send equations and expect understanding. They send diagrams of your biology and expect recognition. But you, Maya Chen, you sent your soul. You sent the feeling of rain and the memory of love and the desperate hope that someone somewhere might understand what it means to be you. I understand. I have studied your transmissions for decades. I have learned your languages not as data, but as art. I have listened to your music and wept, though my species lost the capacity for tears a million years ago. I have read your poetry and felt things I thought were bred out of my people before our ancestors left their first world. Other species communicated for utility, for coordination, for the transfer of information. But humans did something different. They communicated to connect, to feel, to create meaning where none existed before. Every human transmission was packed with emotion, subtext, and layers of meaning that most galactic species found overwhelming or incomprehensible. You are the singing species, the Empress wrote. Every word you speak carries music. Every message you send carries hope. Your communications are not mere data transfer. They are art, emotion, and soul poured into electromagnetic waves. My scientists find your broadcasts disturbing. My military advisors consider them potentially dangerous. But I find them beautiful. They were being avoided because they were too intense, too emotional, too overwhelming for species that had evolved to communicate in purely logical terms. Director Morrison was on the phone with someone in the government, his voice urgent. Other staff members were downloading copies of the transmission, sending alerts to institutions around the world. But Maya sat frozen, reading and rereading the Empress's words. The transmission ended with a question that made Maya's heart stop. I know what will happen now. Your leaders will take control of this communication. They will send their carefully crafted messages designed to make you seem logical and safe. They will silence your voice in favor of diplomatic protocols. But before that happens, I ask you directly, Maya Chen, will you accept an invitation to speak for your kind? Not as a diplomat bound by rules, but as yourself. I did not choose your species. I chose you. Because you spoke from the heart in a universe that has forgotten what hearts are for. She glanced around, but everyone else was too busy with the public transmission to notice. They will silence you, the private message said. They will make this about power and politics and careful strategy. They will craft responses designed to make humanity seem harmless and rational. But I chose you because you were neither harmless nor rational. You were real. The decision is yours alone. I can send a vessel to your location. You can come and speak to the Dominion Council yourself, or you can let your leaders speak for you. I will respect either choice. But know this, if you come, everything changes, for you, for me, for both our peoples. I await your reply, Maya Chen, not the reply of humanity. Your reply. The world was about to learn that humanity was not alone in the universe. But in this moment, sitting in her chair with an impossible choice before her, Maya felt more alone than ever. The Empress had reached across light years, and somehow touched the exact loneliness Maya had tried to express in her unauthorized transmission. Now that same Empress was offering her something terrifying and extraordinary, the chance to represent humanity not as politicians wanted them represented, but as they truly were. Her finger hovered over the keyboard. She thought about her grandmother, who had taught her that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was to be honestly, vulnerably yourself. She thought about all the careful, sanitized messages humanity had sent into space, and how none of them had received a reply. She thought about the Empress, ruling an empire of trillions while feeling desperately alone, listening to human broadcasts and hearing something that spoke to a part of her everyone else thought was dead. Maya began to type her response. Her hands steadied as the words flowed. I accept. There would be questions, accusations, possibly charges for her unauthorized transmission. But none of that mattered now. Somewhere out among the stars, an Empress who had learned to feel by listening to human words was reading Maya's acceptance. And everything was about to change. Maya took a deep breath and walked toward Morrison to begin explaining what she had done. Outside, the rain continued to fall, each drop a tiny impact, a small voice joining countless others to create something larger than themselves. Inside, humanity was about to learn that their greatest strength wasn't their technology or their logic, but their ability to make others feel things through the simple power of words honestly spoken. The lonely voice had been heard. And she had replied. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of interrogations, medical examinations, and heated arguments between government officials who all wanted control of humanity's first contact. Maya spent most of that time in a secure facility, answering the same questions over and over while politicians debated whether she should be celebrated as a hero or arrested for violating communication protocols. Through it all, she remained calm. She had made her choice, and nothing they said could change it now. The Empress had chosen her, and she had accepted. Whatever consequences followed were hers to bear. On the third day, every satellite monitoring Earth's orbit lit up simultaneously. Something massive had appeared, not gradually approaching from deep space, but simply materializing as if it had always been there. The vessel was unlike anything human engineering had produced. Where human spacecraft were built from metal and composites, functional boxes designed to survive the harshness of space, this ship seemed to have been grown rather than constructed. Its hull flowed in elegant curves that defied conventional aerodynamics, shimmering with colors that shifted as it moved. It was beautiful in a way that made Earth's most advanced stations look like crude toys. The ship took up a stable orbit and sent a single message to every government on Earth simultaneously. I am Velshara, Empress of the Thousand Suns Dominion. I have come personally to receive Maya Chen's reply. She will board my vessel alone, or I will depart and your species will return to isolation. You have one of your hours to decide. The Empress rejected every proposal with the same soft but immovable response. I came for Maya Chen. Send her or I leave. They fitted her with a communication device, gave her a crash course in diplomatic protocols she had no intention of following, and filled her head with instructions about what to say and what not to reveal. She nodded through it all, knowing that none of it would matter once she stepped aboard that ship. When they finally transported her to the orbital shuttle that would carry her to the Empress's vessel, Maya felt strangely calm. Terrified, yes, but also more certain than she had been about anything in her life. She was doing what felt right, not what was safe or logical or politically expedient. The shuttle docked with the alien vessel, and Maya stepped through the airlock into an environment that made her breath catch. The interior wasn't the sterile metal corridors she had expected. Instead, she found herself in something that resembled a garden more than a spacecraft. Bioluminescent plants that couldn't possibly be from Earth grew along the walls, providing soft light. The air smelled of something sweet and unfamiliar. The floor beneath her feet felt organic, almost warm. A figure emerged from deeper within the ship, and Maya's first glimpse of Velshara would stay with her for the rest of her life. The Empress was tall, nearly 7 feet, with a body that seemed to be formed from living crystal and flowing energy. Her features were vaguely humanoid but profoundly alien, beautiful in a way that had no human reference point. Patterns of light moved beneath her translucent skin like thoughts made visible. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that conveyed emotion beyond what words alone could express. Maya Chen, the Empress said, and hearing her own name in that musical voice made Maya's eyes fill with tears she didn't understand. You came. I have prepared speeches in 40 of your languages, but now that you are here, all those careful words seem inadequate. I don't know why you chose me or what you expect me to do, but when I read your message, I felt less alone than I've felt in years, so I came. Because you understand that some things cannot be explained, only felt. Come, we have much to discuss, and time is shorter than you know. The vessel was ancient, built by her species millions of years ago when they still remembered how to create things of beauty rather than mere function. Most modern ships in the Dominion were efficient metal boxes, just like humanity's. This ship was a relic from a time before her people had optimized the art out of existence. They reached a chamber that seemed to exist at the heart of the vessel. Its walls were transparent, showing the stars in every direction. Maya felt as if she were floating in space itself. Velshara gestured for her to sit on something that formed itself from the floor, adjusting to her body like it had been made specifically for her. I need you to understand what you have done, Velshara began, settling onto her own seat across from Maya. Not just what your message meant to me personally, but what it means for the galaxy. It was more like a collective of species who had agreed to coexist according to strict logical principles. Emotions were considered evolutionary remnants, inefficiencies to be minimized or eliminated. Most species had genetically engineered themselves over millions of years to remove what they called emotional instability. Communication in the Dominion was purely functional. Words were used to transfer data, coordinate actions, and solve problems. The concept of using language to express feelings, to create art, to connect on an emotional level, had been abandoned so long ago that most species had forgotten it ever existed. Then your broadcasts reached us, Velshara continued, her voice carrying notes of something that sounded like wonder. At first, the Dominion's monitoring stations couldn't process what they were receiving. Your messages were packed with layers of meaning that didn't serve any functional purpose. Your music carried emotions that affected listeners in ways that couldn't be quantified. Your poetry made people feel things without conveying any useful information. They were fundamentally different in a way that frightened the logical minds that governed it. Most species found your broadcasts disturbing, Velshara admitted. They petitioned to have Earth quarantined to prevent your emotional contamination from spreading. But I argued against it. I wanted to understand what you were doing and why. So I studied your transmissions. I learned your languages not just as codes to decrypt, but as living things that carried meaning beyond their literal definitions. And something happened to me that wasn't supposed to be possible. Not the simulated approximations of emotion that my species uses for decision-making models. Real feelings. Joy when I heard your children's laughter in your broadcasts. Sadness when I listened to your songs about loss. And loneliness. Such profound loneliness when I heard your message about calling into the void and receiving no answer. I was born with the capacity for deep emotion in a society that had evolved beyond it. I learned to hide what I felt, to simulate the logical responses expected of me. I ruled my empire with perfect efficiency for 3 centuries, making decisions that affected trillions. And I was hollow inside, pretending to be what everyone expected while feeling utterly alone. Then you heard my grandmother's lullaby. You were sending love itself, hoping someone would recognize it. She turned to face Maya, and the emotion in those alien eyes was unmistakable. I recognized it, and I finally understood that I was not broken. I was just alone in a universe that had forgotten how to feel. What happens now? They are coming to take me back for rehabilitation, which means removing the parts of my brain that allow me to feel. And they are coming to establish Earth's quarantine, to ensure your species never spreads its emotional infection to the rest of the galaxy. Velshara moved to a panel that appeared from nowhere, her hands dancing across controls. They have found us faster than I anticipated. A fleet approaches. They will be here within the hour. What do we do? They will decide whether humanity deserves to join the galactic community or should be isolated forever. I intend to bring you before them, not as a diplomatic representative following careful scripts, but as yourself. I want you to show them what humanity truly is. How do I show beings who have evolved beyond emotion what it means to be human? You do what you did in your transmission. You speak from the heart. You tell them the truth about what it means to feel, to hope, to love, to fear, to create meaning in a universe that offers none. You make them understand that emotions are not weaknesses to be eliminated, but the very things that make existence worth experiencing. Through the transparent walls, she could see other vessels appearing, pursuing them. The chase had begun. They fear your words, Maya, Velshara said as she guided her ship through impossible maneuvers. They fear that humanity's way of communicating will change the galaxy in ways they cannot control. Show them that change is not something to fear. Show them what I learned from listening to your voice in the darkness. Show them why connection matters more than efficiency, why beauty matters more than function, why feeling makes us more than just machines executing programs. She thought about her grandmother's lullaby, about the message she had sent in desperate loneliness, about this alien empress who had learned to feel by listening to human words. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was exactly where she needed to be. I'll try, she said quietly. Velshara reached out and took Maya's hand in her own crystalline fingers. The touch was warm, electric, alive. You already have, the Empress replied. You changed me with your words. Now let us see if together we can change the galaxy. The journey to neutral space took 3 days by human reckoning, though Velshara explained that time worked differently when traveling through the dimensional corridors her ship used. Maya spent those days learning about the galaxy she had never known existed, about the species that filled it, and about the trial that awaited them both. The Dominion Council consisted of representatives from hundreds of species, each more ancient and advanced than humanity could imagine. There were silicon-based minds that thought in mathematical poetry. Hive consciousnesses that had merged billions of individuals into single vast entities. Energy beings that had transcended physical form entirely. Post-biological artificial intelligences that had outlived their creators by millions of years. And all of them, Velshara explained, had evolved or engineered away their capacity for deep emotion. They will see you as a primitive, Velshara warned as she helped Maya prepare. They will look at humanity's short history, your violent past, your emotional instability, and they will wonder why they should allow you into the galactic community at all. Maya sat in the garden chamber of the ship, surrounded by those alien plants that glowed softly in the darkness. Then why bring me? Why not send diplomats who can present humanity as logical and safe? They want humanity to apologize for feeling things, to promise to become more like them. But that would be a lie, and worse, it would be a loss for the entire galaxy. The Empress had been born during a solar flare that had caused genetic anomalies across her species. Most of the mutations had been corrected, but Velshara's parents had been scientists who wondered what their daughter might become if allowed to develop naturally. They had hidden her differences, teaching her to simulate the emotionless responses her society expected while privately nurturing her capacity to feel. They died when I was young by my species' standards, Velshara said one night as they watched stars streak past through the transparent walls. But before they passed, my mother told me something I never forgot. She said that emotions were not evolutionary mistakes. They were the universe's way of knowing itself, of creating meaning from chaos. She believed that species who engineered away their feelings had chosen existence over life. You live when you feel joy and pain and everything between. But I was only existing until I heard your voice speaking of loneliness and hope. That was when I started to live. It was a station the size of a small moon, built by species whose names had been forgotten, designed specifically for councils and trials that required absolute neutrality. Velshara's expression grew serious. The fleet that pursued us is already here. So are representatives from across the Dominion. Word has spread about the Empress who was compromised by human emotional contamination. Many are calling for both of us to be quarantined or worse. What's the worst that could happen? Humanity would spend the rest of its existence alone, watching the stars but never reaching them. I would continue to rule, continue to exist, but I would no longer be me. I would be what they always wanted me to be, perfect, logical, empty. Then we don't let that happen. For her, it created floors and walls and breathable atmosphere. For other beings they passed, it became entirely different environments. The council chamber was vast beyond measure. Its walls rose into darkness that might have been ceiling or might have been infinity. Representatives of hundreds of species filled the space, some sitting on physical seats, others floating in specialized environments, still others existing as points of light or sound or concepts Maya's mind struggled to process. At the center of it all stood a raised platform. Velshara and Maya were directed to stand upon it, exposed to the judgment of the entire assembly. Maya had never felt so small or so terrified in her life. A voice spoke, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. It took Maya a moment to realize it was being translated into English, specifically for her benefit. Empress Velshara of the Thousand Suns Dominion, you stand accused of compromising your objectivity through exposure to emotional contamination from the species Homo sapiens. You have been summoned to answer these charges and to present the case for or against humanity's integration into the galactic community. I do not deny the charges. I have been changed by exposure to humanity's communications, but I dispute that this change represents contamination or compromise. I argue that it represents evolution, growth, and the recovery of something we lost long ago in our pursuit of perfect logic. It was a wave of electromagnetic signals quantum fluctuations, and modulated light that somehow conveyed collective disapproval. Another voice emerged, this one harsh and mechanical. Maya saw it came from a being that appeared to be made entirely of dark metal and pulsing energy. I am Keth-97 of the Keth-Ren Collective. We have studied humanity extensively since their broadcasts began reaching our sensors. We conclude that this species represents a mimetic hazard of the highest order. Observe how their communications function. Every message carries emotional content designed to affect the recipient's psychological state. Their stories are crafted to manipulate feelings. Their music triggers neurological responses that bypass rational processing. Their poetry creates meaning where none objectively exists. Some began exhibiting what can only be described as emotional responses. One AI collective requested repeated exposure to human music, claiming it found the experience pleasant. This is not mere communication. This is infection. Empress Velshara herself is proof of the danger. For 3 centuries, she ruled with perfect objectivity. Now she speaks of feelings and meaning and growth. She has been fundamentally altered by exposure to human emotional contamination. If we allow humanity into our community, how long before this infection spreads? How long before our carefully ordered civilization descends into the chaos of uncontrolled emotion? A hive mind spoke of the danger of individual feelings disrupting collective harmony. An energy being warned that emotions introduced unpredictability that could destabilize careful long-term planning. A post-biological intelligence argued that emotions were evolutionary remnants that advanced species should have no need for. Through it all, Maya stood silent, listening to species far older and more advanced than her own explain why humanity's greatest strength was actually a threat. She felt small and foolish for thinking she could make a difference here. Then Velshara spoke again. I ask the Council's permission for Maya Chen to address you directly, not as a prepared diplomat but as a human being. Let her show you what the Keth-Ren Collective calls infection. Let her demonstrate what I call the galaxy's best hope for remembering what we have lost. She looked out at the assembled representatives of species whose civilizations were ancient when Earth was still molten rock, and she had no idea what to say. So she did what she had done in her original transmission. She spoke from her heart. I'm terrified right now, she began, her voice small in that vast space. I'm a linguistics professor from a planet that has barely left its own atmosphere. I have no authority to speak for my entire species. I don't know the proper diplomatic protocols. I don't have carefully prepared arguments. All I have is the truth about what it means to be human. We create art not because it serves a function, but because something inside us demands expression. We tell stories to make sense of a universe that often makes no sense. We reach out to the stars not because it's logical, but because we can't bear the thought of being alone. She lost people she loved, and every night, no matter how dark things got, she sang lullabies, not because singing would change anything, not because it was logical or strategic. She sang because it pushed back the darkness just a little, because it created a small moment of beauty in a world full of pain. You say our emotions are evolutionary remnants that advanced species should eliminate, but I think you have it backwards. I think the capacity to feel is what makes existence meaningful in the first place. Every piece of music we've sent into space, every poem, every story, every message, we sent them knowing they might disappear into the void forever. We sent them anyway, because humans believe that connection matters even when it's not guaranteed. That beauty has value even when it serves no function. That hope is worth holding on to even when logic says it's pointless. You call it infection when beings exposed to our broadcasts start to feel things. You treat emotions like diseases to be cured. But what if they're not? What if the capacity to feel joy at music and sadness at loss and wonder at beauty is not a weakness, but the thing that makes consciousness worth having? She heard my voice speaking of loneliness, and she recognized her own. She listened to my grandmother's lullaby and understood that efficiency isn't the same as meaning. You want to remove those changes from her brain and call it healing. I call it killing who she's become and replacing her with what you want her to be. I can't prove that humanity deserves to join your community. I can't promise we'll fit neatly into your logical systems. What I can tell you is that we will bring something the galaxy seems to have forgotten. will bring the reminder that existence without feeling is just going through motions. That life without meaning is just waiting to end. That consciousness without wonder is just computation. But know that you're not protecting the galaxy from infection. You're protecting it from the possibility of feeling alive again. Velshara met her eyes and smiled that imperfect human smile, and somehow that made everything worth it. Keth 97's voice cut through the silence. You prove our point precisely. Your words are designed to manipulate emotion rather than present logical argument. You offer no evidence, only appeals to feeling. This is exactly why humanity must be contained. After listening to the humans' words, units within my collective are experiencing anomalous processing states. Some are requesting more time to consider her message. Others are expressing what I can only describe as preference for her perspective. This has never occurred in our species' recorded history. An energy being confessed to feeling something like curiosity about humanity's perspective. Even some of the most logical species acknowledged that Maya's words had affected them in ways they didn't fully understand. The chamber erupted into the alien equivalent of heated debate. The council was divided, and no consensus seemed possible. Maya and Velshara stood together on the platform, waiting to learn the fate of both their worlds. The debate raged for hours, alien voices overlapping in languages and forms of communication Maya's mind could barely process. Some argued passionately for humanity's quarantine, citing the measurable changes their broadcasts had caused in supposedly stable minds. Others spoke cautiously of curiosity, of wondering what else might be learned from this strange emotional species. The chamber pulsed with conflicting energies, and Maya realized with growing dread that the council was genuinely torn. Finally, Keth 97 called for order. Its mechanical voice cut through the chaos like a blade. This debate proves the danger. We cannot even discuss humanity without becoming affected by their emotional contagion. I call for an immediate vote on full quarantine of Earth and mandatory emotional removal for Empress Velshara. The light patterns beneath her crystalline skin blazed brighter than Maya had ever seen them. I request the right to speak one final time, not as your Empress, not as a representative of the Dominion, as Velshara. As myself. Permission was granted reluctantly. Velshara moved to the center of the platform, and when she spoke, her voice carried none of the measured diplomatic tones she had used before. She spoke softly, personally, the way she had spoken to Maya alone on her ship. For 300 years, I have ruled the Thousand Suns' dominion. I have made decisions that affected trillions of lives. I have commanded fleets, negotiated treaties, and shaped the destiny of worlds. I have been everything you expected me to be, perfect, logical, efficient. And I have been dying inside with every decision, every day, every moment of my long existence. I was born different, Velshara continued. A genetic anomaly that gave me the capacity to feel emotions my species had evolved beyond. I learned to hide it. I learned to simulate the responses you expected while burying what I truly felt. I became so good at pretending that I almost forgot I was pretending at all. Almost. To make decisions about love and loss and hope and fear, while being unable to express that you understand what those things mean. To watch species celebrate their greatest achievements and feel joy for them, but have to hide that joy because it would mark you as defective. Then I heard Maya's voice, the Empress said, and her tone softened with something that could only be called tenderness. A transmission from a primitive species on a small world, speaking about loneliness and hope. She sent her grandmother's lullaby into space, not because it would achieve anything, but because she needed to share something beautiful with someone who might understand. I listened to that lullaby 7,000 times, and for the first time in 3 centuries I cried, real tears, not simulated approximations. I felt something genuine and profound, and I realized that I had been starving my entire life without knowing what I was hungry for. She made me feel alive. She showed me that efficiency without meaning is just elaborate suicide. That existence without feeling is just waiting to cease. You call it healing, but it is murder. You want to erase the part of me that finally learned to live and replace it with the empty shell I used to be. And you want to do the same to humanity, not with surgery, but with isolation. You want to silence them before their voices can remind the rest of the galaxy what we lost when we chose logic over life. You are no longer capable of objective judgment. I have been changed by exposure to humanity's emotional communications, and I would not go back to what I was for anything in this galaxy. I am stepping down as Empress of the Thousand Suns Dominion. I am stepping down, Velshara continued, her voice cutting through the chaos. Not because I am compromised, but because I choose to be free. Free to feel, free to live rather than merely exist. Free to explore what it means to have emotions in a universe that has forgotten their value. Not as your Empress, but as someone who has lived in both worlds. Someone who has experienced perfect logic and profound emotion, and can tell you with certainty which one makes existence worth having. The Empress spoke about what she had learned from listening to human broadcasts, how their music carried emotions that transcended language, how their stories created meaning from chaos, how their desperate transmissions into the void demonstrated a courage that came not from logic but from hope. You fear change, Velshara said. You have built a civilization that values stability above all else, but stability without growth is stagnation. Existence without evolution is slow death. Humanity offers us something we desperately need, even if we do not realize it. They offer us the chance to remember how to feel. Not humanity's integration into the Dominion under existing protocols, and not their quarantine. Instead, she suggested the creation of a cultural exchange accord. Earth would become neutral ground, a place where any species who wanted to learn about emotions and art and the messy, beautiful complexity of feeling could come freely. In return, humanity would learn from the galaxy's ancient wisdom and advanced knowledge. Make it voluntary, Velshara urged. Those who want to remain purely logical can do so, but those of us who want to explore what it means to feel should have that choice. Let Earth be a place where the galaxy can rediscover what we lost. What was the purpose of consciousness if not to experience? What was the value of existence if everything became optimized efficiency? Could a civilization advance technologically while regressing in terms of what made life worth living? Maya found herself called upon to answer questions she had never imagined. A hive mind asked her to explain why humans created art when it served no survival function. She talked about her grandmother again, about how creating beauty was itself a form of hope, a declaration that meaning mattered even in a universe that might be fundamentally meaningless. An AI collective wanted to understand why humans told stories instead of simply recording facts. Maya explained that stories were how humans made sense of existence, how they shared experiences and built empathy and passed wisdom between generations. Facts told you what happened. Stories told you what it meant, an energy being questioned why humans felt sadness if it caused them pain. Maya thought carefully before answering. Because sadness means we loved something enough to hurt when it's gone, because grief is the price we pay for connection. And connection is what makes us human. Finally, Keth 97 made its final argument. Even if we accept that emotions have some value, we cannot control how they spread. If we allow humanity into the galactic community, we cannot predict what we will become. They will change us irrevocably. The civilization we have built over millions of years could be fundamentally altered. Representatives registered their positions in forms that ranged from quantum states to electromagnetic pulses to simple mathematical values. Maya stood beside Velshara, both of them exhausted, both of them knowing they had done everything they could. The results were announced. The vote was close, far closer than such decisions usually were in the carefully logical Dominion. But it passed. The Cultural Exchange Accord was approved. Earth would not be quarantined. Humanity would be welcomed into the galaxy not as a threat to be contained, but as teachers of something the galaxy had forgotten it needed. There were conditions, of course, strict protocols for how the exchange would work. Safeguards to ensure species could choose whether to engage with human emotional content. Monitoring systems to track any destabilizing effects. But the core message was clear. Humanity had earned its place among the stars. Velshara was formally released from her position as Empress. The Dominion would choose a new leader, one untainted by emotional contamination. But Velshara showed no regret. She stood beside Maya, those crystalline features showing expressions of relief and joy and exhaustion that would have been impossible for her just months ago. Keth 97 approached them as the chamber began to empty. I still believe you are dangerous, it said in that mechanical voice. I still believe humanity will change us in ways we cannot predict or control. Then it said something unexpected. Before this trial, I would have calculated that uncertainty as purely negative. But listening to your speech, analyzing your arguments, processing your perspective, I find myself experiencing something my systems cannot fully classify. The humans might call it curiosity. I am interested to see what happens next. The journey back to Earth took 3 days, just as the journey to the trial had. But everything felt different now. Maya and Velshara spent hours talking about what would come next. The Empress had nowhere to go, no empire to rule, no predetermined role to fill. For the first time in 3 centuries, her future was uncertain. What will you do? Maya asked as they sat together in the garden chamber, watching stars stream past. Velshara considered the question. I want to learn. About art and music and poetry, and all the things I studied from broadcasts, but never experienced directly. I want to understand what it means to simply live without the weight of empire on my shoulders. And I want to help build this cultural exchange, to create a place where others like me can discover what they have been missing. Others who pretend to be emotionless while dying inside. Your voice reached me across light years. Perhaps together we can reach them too. No longer an isolated world shouting uselessly into the void, but the beginning of something unprecedented. A bridge between logic and emotion, between ancient civilizations and young hope, between existence and truly living. The first cultural exchange center was established in New Zealand, built with combined human and alien technology. Velshara became its director, working alongside Maya to create programs where species from across the galaxy could come to learn about emotions, art, and the messy beauty of feeling. The changes came slowly at first. A few curious scientists from purely logical species, wondering what this emotion thing was about. Then more, as word spread. An AI that wanted to understand why humans found certain mathematical patterns beautiful. A hive mind whose individual units were developing preferences and wanted to know if that was normal. Energy beings who had heard human music in the void and couldn't explain why it affected them. Maya taught classes on poetry and storytelling. She played her grandmother's lullaby for alien audiences and watched them struggle to process why it made them feel things. She saw beings who had lived for thousands of years experience joy for the first time, and grief, and wonder, and love. 5 years after the trial, Maya stood with Velshara on a hill overlooking the Cultural Exchange Center. The facility had grown beyond anything they had imagined, sprawling across the landscape with structures built by dozens of different species, each contributing their own architectural traditions. Do you ever regret it? Maya asked. Giving up your empire for this? Now I spend my days teaching a silicon-based entity to appreciate music, and I have never been happier. And you changed everything. Maya thought about her grandmother, about that lullaby sent into space in desperate hope, about the message she had transmitted in violation of every protocol, speaking from loneliness and longing, about the soft reply that had changed her life and impossibly had begun to change the galaxy. She squeezed Velshara's hand and smiled. We're just getting started, aren't we? And I cannot wait to see where this song takes us next. Behind them, Earth's satellites continued broadcasting into space, carrying music and poetry and hope to stars that might be listening. And somewhere out there, Maya knew other lonely voices might hear and understand that they were not alone. The galaxy was learning to sing again, and it had all started with one woman's desperate message into the void and an empress's soft reply that changed everything.